Hello, World Singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
Hello. Welcome back, everyone. We have an episode for you today. This is going to be a big one. Buckle up, put your thinking caps on, and get ready for us to dive deep into the Nahel Bond.
We will start with some listener feedback from our last episode because we got a lot. That was a
real humdinger.
Yes.
I just wanted to use that word.
A conversation generator, which is awesome. That's the name of the podcast.
Last episode, we talked about the epilogue, specifically really diving deep into Taravangian and Odium and the kind of the time shenanigans or memory shenanigans with breath. Clarissa wrote in passionately, Odium fueled.
She starts by saying, quote, "I haven't quite finished, but this is one of the few podcasts where yelling at my phone isn't sufficient. I think that the issue of Hoyd remembering that he was practicing sleight of hand with Design, but not remembering her leaving, is a relic of Odium pulling out Hoyd's memory of the conversation a bit too far. He was, from my interpretation, trying to erase Hoyd's suspicion, not mess around with anything more far-reaching. He needs to keep suspicion off of the change in vessels for as long as possible. So he tried to finally pick out that conversation and redo it, but he basically went back to a save point just a bit too early. He put Hoyd back before he was noticed, but didn't realize Design had been there, or else had no way to bring her back without alerting her. If Odium corrupted any other memories, I would guess that it was either incidental or accidental or an afterthought / crime of opportunity. His only plan was to fix his error in pushing for information." End quote. Great points, all.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Clarissa is saying, that it was a mistake of Odium's.
Yeah, and I think we went on to say that a little bit later in the episode, so maybe Clarissa hadn't gotten there yet. But I think this is exactly right. Odium / Taravangian is playing around with this power that he has no previous experience with, versus we compared it to Vasher, who is very adept at dealing with these types of things and probably does have, well, we see that he does in Warbreaker, have the skills to, as she says, really particularly kind of pull out a specific thread, versus Odium here kind of using a hammer and smashing everything.
What may have also thrown her off was the way that we were talking about it early before we brought in that conversation with the breaths and the memories, about like actual manipulation of time versus just a memory maneuver by Odium.
Oh, yeah, for sure, just memory.
Yeah, and I think that what she said about Design not being present is super important, because changing or manipulating a Spren is going to be very different than changing Hoyd's memories because of the way that he had stored them away in the breath. So like if Design was part of the equation, I don't think it would have worked at all. I think the only way is that Hoyd is like isolated.
Still been there.
Yeah, exactly. Because she would have just been like, what are you talking about? Like, no, this didn't happen this way. And you can't change a Spren as easily as Odium could change Hoyd in that situation. But I totally agree. The whole point is that new Odium, Teravodium, does not want to give up the game too early about the change in shard ownership. So thank you, Clarissa, for pointing that out. We also had someone who mentioned another popular theory about the ending of Rhythm of War, this time from Jasso.
Yeah, Jaso.
Silent J. Also.
Yasso.
But maybe. The theory is basically that when Hoyd said, "This is exactly how I wanted the conversation with Odium to go," he was being literal, and that everything that he wanted actually happened exactly as he wanted it.
Yeah, and the argument ties this into the, opening monologue of the epilogue, in which Hoyt is talking about sleight of hand and illusion and tying that in with what happens in the epilogue, and basically saying that there is an illusion or a sleight of hand happening through Hoyt, and we as the audience are seeing something that is not what it appears to be.
Well, we and Odium are seeing
Sure.
something that Hoyt wants us to look at, his memories stored in breaths, and like focus on that. Oh, how dangerous is that? That's the thing. But then while we are focused on that, the sleight of hand is happening somewhere else. And that magic trick is not revealed yet. So we are in the middle of a magic trick, is that basic argument.
Very interesting theory. I would highly suggest everyone check out that video, and we will link it. And then Courtney also wrote in to say, basically agreeing with us from the last episode. She compares Brandon's writing in this epilogue to the BioShock video game. And she says, quote, Brandon does that in his writing all the time, but the epilogue was the epitome of this. The one character who knows the real truth and chooses not to reveal it is, in the end, fallible. Amazing, end quote.
Which, as you said, is clearly how we interpret the situation, that the Hoyt character is fallible, but doesn't imagine himself to be so, and so therefore doesn't share what's going on with anyone. Thank you so much for reaching out. You are always welcome to reach out to us on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. We're everywhere. Follow the conversation. Join us. But without further ado,
yes,
I think that one of the most important relationships in the Stormlight Archive is between Kaladin and Syl, and the growth of Kaladin as a character, the revelations that Syl brings as the first spren that we meet, and kind of our gateway to this magic universe, figuring out their powers together. Kaladin obviously swearing an ideal every single book in connection with how far we are in the series. Kaladin and Syl's relationship is arguably the backbone of the first part of the Stormlight Archive.
It's certainly our biggest window into the Nahel Bond, which is what we'll be exploring in this episode. I just want to highlight the fact that it's taken us to, what is this, episode 12 of our Rhythm of War series, and we haven't really even talked about Kaladin until now.
Which I think is apropos of the situation where the Stormlight Archive is moving beyond just Kaladin's story, and did so earlier, but each book is progressively getting less and less Kaladin focused.
Yeah.
Rhythm of War was the least Kaladin focused of the books that we've had so far. I like that trend. I think that it's the perfect way, you start Game of Thrones with your Stark family and a little bit of Jon and Bran, climbing up his things and whatnot, and Ned, and then that opens up into a wider world where the Game of Thrones is being played, and you have all these other characters from different countries and blah, blah, blah. I want the same thing in Stormlight Archive as well, where we start with our Kaladin, and that then grows into something much, much broader than just a single individual. But I do think that this relationship and this story of Kaladin at point A, where we meet him, to wherever Kaladin ends up, is going to be the focal point of the Stormlight Archive, at least the first half. No comment on books 6 through 10.
Sure.
Part of the reason for that is because it is through Kaladin and Syl's relationship that we begin to understand the greater Nahel Bond, what it means to be radiant, what is happening with honor and cultivation. All of these different connections are kind of first seen through what's going on with Kaladin. And a lot of the times it's sadness. Sadness is going on with Kaladin.
Yeah, pretty much. In this book, we hear so many hints and clues too that add to our understanding of what the Nahel Bond is, and really the nature of this bond. For example, quote, You and the others, Pattern said, refer to Shadesmar as the world of the Spren and the physical realm as your world or the real world. That is not true. There are not two worlds but one, and we are not two peoples but one. Humans, Spren. Two halves, neither complete. End quote.
An interesting quote, I think in part at least because it once again leaves out the singers and the whole other, it's just humans in Spren. But like, what about the singers? I think that this is a great realization, though, coming from Pattern, that the division between the physical world and the cognitive realm is more elusive.
Permeable.
Yeah, exactly. And the Radiants are clearly an example of how permeable it is.
Yeah, especially with the way that we are starting to see this Spren grow and change. In particular, Syl, we start seeing her become much more present in the physical realm and much more cognizant and independent, and she has more agency over her appearance.
Yeah,
and like
even small things
being able to generate color and things like that.
Yes, so that her clothing is like now an offset blue from her skin tone.
Yeah.
Or what she used to just be as a whole, in whatever form she took. Like she wore the kind of short or knee-length dress when she was earlier in the books, but it was always described as like the same color from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And now it's almost like an artist is going back over a sketch and like adding in more detail. So like starts with one shade of blue, but then the more fine tuning that is happening now, and Scylla's literally, taking form or becoming more real in front of our eyes.
Yeah, and we've speculated in the past about a potential Legend of Korra situation in the future of Roshar, where the cognitive and physical realms will be more integrated and like meld together, possibly. Another quote that sort of backs up what Pattern says there is in regards to Kaladin and Syl, and that is, quote, "They were not whole, either one, without the other," end quote. So this reiteration of the idea that like the Spren and the humans sort of need each other and are functioning as two halves of a whole in some way.
We also have a quote from Rabaniel giving the, much more distant history a little bit of light in our modern Rosharian world, where she says, quote, "I wasn't there when your kind came to our world," speaking about humans. "My grandmother, however, always mentioned the smoke. At first she thought you had strange skin patterns, but that was because so many human faces had been burned or marked by soot from the destruction of the world they left behind. She talked about the way your livestock moaned and cried from their burns, the result of human surge binding without oaths, without checks. Of course, that was before any of us understood the surges, before the Spren left us for you, before the war started," end quote.
So I thought that was just super interesting. One, such a descriptive and poignant passage about the coming of the humans to this new world immediately after this destruction. And then also just like she says that the humans came before anyone understood the surges and before the Spren left. And like, I just think that's fascinating. I want to understand what happened with the humans and how they like rediscovered the surges on this other planet, because as we've talked about, the surges on Ashen like functioned way differently and were able to be accessed way differently than they are on Roshar.
I think it is interesting that this concept of the Spren and bonds with singers existed, but their knowledge of the surges did not.
Exactly.
So it's almost as if the surge binding, as the general term, was being practiced by the humans on Ashen, and then when it was brought by them to, the knowledge was brought by them to Roshar, it was going to be an inevitability that surge binding would become practiced on Rashar as well.
But it's interesting that, like, why do the singers not have access to the surges? Basically, I mean, they obviously, if they bond with a spren, they change form.
And I think that's the caveat, is that they have access to the surges in their forms, in their knowledge of the natural world. For example, they've kept the secret of growing food using light and rhythms and music.
Yeah, but that's not really, like, they don't, they don't access the surges in the same way, which I find interesting. But I guess that's just a side effect of, like, having different biology.
I don't know if it's so much a side effect of biology, but what we mentioned briefly when we were talking about the bondsmiths and this concept of, like, if you know that something is possible, for example, on Ashen, the surge binding magic came about because of bacteria or microorganisms of some type. Once they are aware of that knowledge, then the exploration is never ending. And it's like they were always going to keep digging down that path. In the same way with once they got to Rashar, the humans were going to be looking for the surges again and for ways to surge bind.
I know, but I want to know why the singers are so different.
I think it's because they are accessing the surges of the world, and I'm trying to use, like, the broad category here, but they are accessing the surges in different ways. They're using progression. There was a form that allowed the singers to heal each other. That's progression. That's the surge of progression. They were not surge binders, but they were using the surges in more holistic ways.
That depends, like we said in our last episode, about your definition of surge binding.
Of course, but and I'm trying to obviously play around with the definition a little bit.
Yeah.
But, like, if we, in this case, are using a restrictive definition of surge binding to, like, the modern form of what they are doing with the Nahel Bond and manipulating the surges, then none of the singers were surge binders, but their forms allowed them to manipulate the surges. And that, I think, is the key that is unknown about the singer's past. Like, that's what we need more about from the singer's perspective.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with Relaine.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and even Venli and this, like, obviously they are surge binders now. So, like, why didn't they do that before? But to your point, maybe they just, like, didn't think about it being possible and they were getting along just fine.
Because remember, part of what makes up a spren is the thought of beings in the physical realm. So there is an aspect of the humans knew that something was powerful. They thought those thoughts, and then the spren began to reflect that. And so the spren want to then become the thing.
That's an interesting thought.
It's like an Ouroboros, a snake that eats itself type of thing, where they are feeding the spren the kind of knowledge of what they can be, and then the spren want that relationship in return, and so then they start to become that thing that the humans imagined that they were. Which is just a long way of saying that this Nahel Bond is very complicated and is definitely misunderstood.
There's a lot that we don't know or don't understand about it.
Yes, it's misunderstood not just by us, the reader, but also by the characters in the books that are talking about the things, sometimes talking about them as if they know it 100% or that they're much more confident than they should be. A character like Hoyd, can probably sound very confident, but I would say even he has a limited understanding of what the Nahel Bond is and what it's capable of.
Yeah, well, Kalek is the one who's like, I know the truth about the recreants and the Nahel Bond.
And it scares him in a big way. And
Kalek, what is it?
What's
the truth? Know. Tell me.
Specifically, there is the problem with Ba'edo Mishram that Kalek talks about, and how that imprisonment of Ba'edo Mishram impacted every single spren on Rashar, including the sibling. And so bunch of questions about like, what is this Nahel Bond? What does it mean? But
then like, how is it different now than it was before, potentially?
I think one of the most basic things about the Nahel Bond is that there does exist a physical limit to that bond itself.
Which I don't think I realized before Rhythm of War. We get that interlude from Syl's perspective, and she says very clearly and specifically that she can't fly too far in the storm, because when she starts getting too far away from Kaladin, she starts forgetting and becoming more wind spren or lesser spren light.
I think it is really telling, that interlude with Syl, that a couple of miles seems to be what she references as her physical limit. Now, is that for every spren? Is it different for honor spren? Or is it universal? But then importantly, the limit, the physical distance limit, shrinks a whole bunch when the tower protection system gets inverted and the limitations get set on all of our radiance. And I believe that, as we will talk about shortly, that limitation is really important, because as is so often the truth with Brandon's writing, it is where the limits are set where Brandon actually is like finding the most interest in things and exploring things the most. So when Syl goes from being able to travel a couple of miles away from Kaladin to not being able to go many floors away from Kaladin, I think that that is a key aspect, is like the stronger the bond is, the more distance, physical distance that I think can exist. And the weaker the bond is, the less that is. The only other time that we see this relationship really frayed with Kaladin and Syl is Words of Radiance, when Kaladin is having the self-doubt about Elhokar and Dalinar, and Syl almost leaves.
Yeah, but I thought that was like really the only thing that would affect their relationship, right? Would be like the status of the oaths. I did not realize, again, until this book, that there was also this kind of physical restriction put on it, which calls to mind the connection or like the bond that we've been talking about between just people and like their native planet, restricting their physical movement and their ability to travel, potentially travel off-world.
Yes, I definitely think that one of the words of Brandon, when he was comparing or asked to compare the investiture from Nalthis to the investiture on Rashar, is he said that part of what endowment has done with the breath system and the way that it can only be transferred willingly, you have to, if you want to move it, you have to say that you are going to give up this breath, my life to yours, my breath become yours, that type of thing, is that it's not a particularly sticky magic system. It's not bound as much to Nalthis, whereas Rasharian investiture, in the form of all the different types of light, is very, very sticky, but very abundant. So there's a lot of it available, but it can't leave because it's very attached to Rashar. And so I think that because Syl is a manifestation of investiture, in that she herself is very sticky, and she is going to, and all spren are going to be limited in their physical mobility at any time or place. I don't know if there will ever be a circumstance where spren are, for example, like able to travel from one side of the planet to the other without their radiant in tow.
Sure.
Let's talk about this realization that we have over Rhythm of War of how human Syl is becoming. We talked about the color thing and how she's kind of like presenting herself differently, but it's not just that. It is her actual personality that is growing and developing, and it is most clearly, I always fall back on the Inside Out characters and emotions, those 5 basic emotions that exist in the Inside Out world, but Syl is basically, almost all joy. And then she's got a tiny...
she's very joyous.
Yes, and then she's got a tiny bit of anger, like, hidden behind her, but she's, like, a lot of joy. And then just like joy, spoilers for Inside Out, but just
like haven't seen that movie yet.
Joy in Inside Out, she needs to realize the importance of sadness and grief and loss. And as she does so, it is shocking to all the characters, Kaladin including.
Yeah. And readers, I will say. I felt very much similar to Kaladin and like, Syl, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be like happy and cute.
I was definitely like, you need some sadness, girl. You're too bubbly. We need to knock you down a couple of notches. And she obviously has all of that inside of her. That's one of the weird aspects of Spren, is that she was a fully developed... We don't actually know what her old Knight Radiant ideal state was at, but he was at least third, probably fourth, maybe fifth. We don't know how far up it goes in terms of what ideals he has formed. But I think that Syl was functionally a fully formed individual that then reverted back and is now only gaining again what she had lost. And so that's very different than like a child learning and experiencing things for the first time.
I mean, that depends on your world philosophy. Some would say that that's exactly what we do. We die and then we come back and remember again.
Like a reincarnation type of thing.
Exactly.
So Syl is definitely wanting to have this closer connection with Kaladin because Kaladin is so wrapped
He's in a bad spot.
Yeah, he's in
a real bad spot at the beginning. Well, really throughout the entire book. When is Kaladin not in a bad spot?
He is freezing in combat. He's dealing with post-traumatic stress, as he always has. He has to retire. He's like forced to retire by Dalinar. He finds a little bit of solace, momentary solace, with reverting back to a surgeon, and Syl thinks that this is like, hey, we can do it. We can protect people. You can be happy with your family, and we can still, be like Radiants together. That's totally awesome. But she goes to Dalinar and says, like, he's still sad, and I don't understand why. Like, I
don't know how to help him.
Yes, I thought everything was great, or at least improving, and it doesn't actually seem to be. What's wrong? And then she asks Dalinar if he can boost her connection with Kaladin, basically like increase her awareness and to help her better understand. And I don't think that Dalinar says that he can do that, but he was like, even if I could, I don't think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
And it's more of, here is something that Dalinar basically like opens up the book to Syl's life, and he was like, didn't you used to have a old Knight Radiant?
Yeah, he like opens the door to empathy.
Yes.
And kind of shows her or helps her find a similar time or a similar feeling in her past that she can then apply to Kaladin. And she kind of goes on this journey of discovering within herself these memories and emotions that she has stored and hasn't really thought about or accessed in a really long time. And later, way later in the book, she's talking about this process to Kaladin, and she says, quote, "I'm a spren, not a human. If I'm thinking like this, does it mean I'm broken?" And he says, "It means you're alive." End quote. And he goes on to tell her, like, I think this is good that you're actually thinking about this and feeling it and processing it, because that's a much more healthy way to deal with it than just like shoving it to the back of your mind and never thinking about it.
Because that is what Kaladin first suggests, noticing that she's being a little bit weird and morose or depressed. He says basically, forget about it, think about something else, distract yourself, I believe is his actual phrase that he uses. And then she responds with,
quote, "Is that how you stand it? Knowing everyone is going to die, you just don't think about it?"
Basically, Kaladin said, refilling his syringe from the wooden water jug, then putting the tip into Tef's mouth and slowly emptying it. Everyone dies eventually.
"I won't," she said. "Spren are immortal, even if you kill them. Someday I'll have to watch you die."
What brought this on? Kaladin asked. This isn't like you.
"Yep, Right, of course. Not like me. She plastered a smile on her face. Sorry. End quote.
And Kaladin, that scene continues with Kaladin like calling her out, be like, I've put on a lot of fake smiles, girl. Like, that was a bad one. We're going to keep talking about this. And their relationship is deepening, I think, because of what you said, which is that empathy. That Syl had a uplifting quality, a hope-like quality for Kaladin early in the books when he was low, suicide, Bridge 4, all that time period. He needs Syl as like the beacon of hope. And now their relationship is at a state where they are relying on themselves equally. Syl needs Kaladin and Kaladin needs Syl.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the sort of deepening or complication of their relationship, that like there's only so long that a true relationship that is, mutual can rely on one person propping the other one up, and that like at some point Kaladin needs to learn how to build coping mechanisms for himself so that he can support himself, and then they can both also support each other.
Probably one of the most heartbreaking scenes.
The most heartbreaking. I'm just going to say it.
It is, of course, just every single time we were reading these books and we're like, when is it going to be, Brandon? When are you going to break my heart again?
Yeah.
It's always there in the distant future, or just looking at me from the past, just like, you want to be sad? Think about when Teft dies. It's just always there now. Thanks a lot, Brandon Sanderson. But the death of Teft is preceded by the death of his spren. And I think that this is important because the language that is used really solidifies what every single Radiance spren bond is like for them personally. Obviously, Teft and his spren Fenderana have a specific bond, just like Kaladin and Syl's is more about grief. But all of the different spren bonds, everything that is the Nahel Bond should be seen in this same way. And when it is lost, it is this painful for all of them. I believe this is also why the flip side of this equation is Maya and Maya's declaration in Lasting Integrity, which we will talk about in a future episode and have mentioned in the past. But just like, these are kind of two sides of the same coin. When you realize what is happening to Teft, you also realize that the reverse happened to Maya. The reverse happened to Syl.
Yeah, not really the reverse, but the same thing, really, just as you said, on the other side.
Yes.
Quote, something ripped inside Teft, something deeper than his own heart, a part of his soul, his being, was torn away. He collapsed immediately, falling near the white spot in the sand that was all that remained of Fenderana. No. End quote. Wow. Okay.
Sorry for making everybody sad.
Cry now.
Yeah, exactly. We will be back after 10 minutes of bawling. We need to remember that part of what is happening with the Sprenbon is that the individuals have cracks in their spiritual web. They are broken.
Right.
And the Nahel Bond is in part about binding back this person through a spren, with a spren.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's really binding it back together. It's more like putting a pin or something.
It's holding, the spren is holding the person together. It's like their spiritual web is ripped apart by the trauma of whatever they dealt with. And the spren comes in and is like, I got this. They're doing that Spider-Man, either the new one or the old one, whatever one you like, where like they're holding two things together and they're just like, can't let it go, and they're just like, nope, this is fine. Everything's great.
I mean, I think I like the comparison to that Japanese like philosophy of repairing pottery, which is putting like gold in the cracks.
So you can very clearly see it.
Right. Yeah. And sort of like highlighting those cracks.
This is where it broke.
The broken places become these beautiful places.
Yeah. Artwork in the brokenness.
Yeah.
And so then when Fenderana dies, whatever analogy you want to use, whatever metaphor you want to think about it as, it is like all of those little veins of gold that you just mentioned are instantly burned away. And the pot, of course, or the pottery is just going to crack and fall apart. And so that is what happens to Teth. His death shortly there follows, but the same or a similar experience is happening to Kaladin when he is witnessing his world fall apart, and the feeling that he has is that same type of thing, that everything is breaking around him and that he can't control it and that he's all alone in this circumstance. The difference, of course, is that his spren is not dead in this circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I think like really the thing to take away from this is just the profound seriousness of this bond, that it really isn't something to be taken lightly, where you can just like bond and then break your bond and then like la la la, maybe bond again, you know.
It does,
but that it is part of your spirit web.
Yes.
And that losing your spren or breaking your bond or, you know, losing your human from the other side is extremely serious.
Overall, the story of Kaladin in Rhythm of War is both clearly present and also taking a back seat to a lot of the other aspects that we're learning about Shadesmar and Navani and the Fused and all that stuff. Where would you rate Kaladin's journey in this book compared to the other stories?
This is such a loaded question.
I know. I loaded it for a reason, people. We know what we're doing here.
So much like talk and debate and sometimes outright fighting about this on various forums on the interweb. So don't come for us. We're just here to have a conversation.
You can come at me. I'm a Stoneward. Do whatever you want, peeps.
I started out this book feeling so excited about Kaladin's storyline. More so than I have ever felt about Kaladin before. I just was really psyched to see him do something different. I thought it was really good that he was, you know, being retired and kind of having to deal with his sort of like addiction to fighting and like figure out what else to do with his life, finally dealing with his PTSD and, you know, potentially becoming a surgeon. Or I feel like we've seen so much of the same from Kaladin, which is always just like beating his head against this, like, I need to save everyone. I need to protect everyone. How can I do it? I can't. It's tearing me apart.
Can I kill and protect?
Yeah, it's good, but I felt like it had run its course, and I was so excited to see him do something different. And then the rest of the book goes on to have him do literally the exact same thing over and over and over again. He has the exact same fight with the pursuer like 4 times. They're exactly the same. And I just found it to be incredibly boring, both from a character perspective of like so frustrated that he wasn't like growing in any way, but again, just kept fighting when like clearly you need to be done fighting. And then also just in the more literary sense of like, it's extremely repetitive.
I think that the biggest aspect that you just mentioned is that his story was going in a different route, and that was exciting because of its newness. I really did find this is not said to Kaladin, but you mentioned how much it applies to Kaladin. It's Taravangian talking to Dalinar, and Taravangian says this.
Quote, "As you live now, protecting people isn't your true ideal. If that were the case, you'd surrender. No. Your true ideal is never giving up, no matter the cost. You realize the pride in that sentiment?" End quote.
And while he's talking to Dalinar, I feel like that very 100%. Much lines up with Kaladin.
Yeah.
Like Kaladin is a never give up type of guy. You get knocked down, you get right back up.
Right. And then, yeah, it does come to the question of, are you really doing this because you want to protect people, or are you doing it because you feel obligated, because you've woven this thing into your identity that now you're the person that protects people? You always have to be the person fighting. And like, is it really coming from that true desire?
Yes. And of course, this is what the fourth ideal is all about, and why Kaladin is unable to say it, though he knows the words, according to Brandon, at the beginning of the book. He knows the words. He knows that he is ready to say the words. Syl knows that he's like, everyone's going to accept the words. Everything is great. He just refuses to do so because I think he is prideful in the way that Taravangian is talking about. He's like, you literally cannot do anything else because you've woven it into your identity of I'm going to protect, I'm going to fight, and I will never give up. That got him through a lot of his life and got him through a lot of the difficulties in his life. It seemed like this path that he was on with the, we'll call it like the mental health provider, was really great for him. And I thought there was a lot of interesting...
I loved it so much because like at the very beginning of this book, you know, I get a little bit of the ways in everyone obviously is having issues. And I, for a second, just like put the book down and was just like, God, these people really need some mental health professionals. Like, where are the psychologists on Rashar? Because this is getting ridiculous. And then shortly after that, Kaladin sort of goes on to like start the very beginnings of some mental health reform on Rashar. And I was just like, oh, perfect. Someone heard me.
And I love that. You know, he and Teft, who stays behind with him, are looking after Norrell, and they find the many people who either because of trauma in general or because of actual being in combat over the last several years are all dealing with various states of mental, I don't even want to say disease necessarily, it's just like mental trauma. And some of them have progressed to the state where there is definitely something that we would label in our modern world as a disease or a syndrome or something. But I really liked that exploration. And I think that even the things that he is doing, like getting them outside and like getting them into fresh air. They're going on walks. They're doing
and just like being in a group.
Yes, group conversations and group therapy.
Before they were like isolated in the monastery or whatever. And he's like, no, they need to be like around people. They need to, yeah, exactly, to have a group of people that they can feel supported by and that they can empathize with, and you know, other people to say, yeah, I feel that too. You're not alone.
They're even using animal therapy, which is often
don't they go? They like go to see the horses or something?
Exactly. Yeah. But like even in our modern world, if you tell someone like, oh, I'm going to do some animal therapy, like it's normally a joke. Like, or people don't perceive it as highly. Yeah. Obviously, dealing with mental health has always been problematic for society. A lot of people, not even one generation. You go like back like 10 years and they're like, you're seeing a therapist? What are you, crazy? Or like the crazy woman or hysteria. You can go back even further.
Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on hysteria.
So even in our modern world, the idea of taking care of yourself and taking care of your mental health has always been frowned upon or looked down upon. So much of our society is, you know, pick yourself up, you know, just ignore it.
Yeah, distract yourself off and try again.
And so I really liked up until part 2 of Kaladin's story when it seemed like he was going in a different direction. And then you actually mentioned that there may still be a way where Kaladin could be engaged in physical combat too.
Yes, I love this idea so much. I am like 100% about it. This is the last conversation that Adolin and Kaladin have before Adolin goes to the cognitive realm. He says, quote, "Let's find a chance to spar together again, all right? I want you to see what I see in duels. It's not about hurting others. It's about being your best." End quote. And my dream, my ultimate dream for Kaladin is for him to be a like surgeon / mental health professional by day and then a duelist on the side, and to just like spar with Adolin and be able to, you know, continue his true love for the physical activity of like spear fighting and combat in quotes, but without that pressure of like death and people dying and like all of the pressure of needing to protect your squad and like not get other people hurt. So take that whole thing out of it and just let him, exercise and like have some fun.
So I feel like we were given this path that Kaladin could go down, and it was like all right there.
Oh, so inspiring.
It was exactly what you just said, surgeon, duelist, mental health advocate. Like that was the happy path for Kaladin.
I was so excited. I was just like 100%. I could read a whole book about Kaladin in that way.
And
that's the opposite of what I got.
The fuse invade the tower. Kaladin tries to hide for a little bit. Tef's life is threatened, or he believes Tef's life is threatened. And Syl lands on his shoulder and he just says, "It was a nice dream, wasn't it?" And she's like, "Yeah, it was. That's not the way we're going to go, though."
I know.
I understand your frustration because it's there and it's so beautiful. And this is where I picked back up on Kaladin's story, or like what I thought of as Kaladin's story, because that was the dream. That is what is possible for Kaladin. He can have that great life. It would be so wonderful if that was the Kaladin that we got to experience. But that's not what's going to happen to Kaladin, and that's not his path. And
well, it still could be.
I don't think it can be. I think that what Kaladin experiences in that moment when he's in his father's surgery room, the fuse come in to take Teft, and he kills the fused, and he tells his father, "I tried to explain it. Your son died long ago." This is not the way that this person, this Kaladin, is going forward, is to follow the path of the Windrunners, and that is a different path than the one we just highlighted.
I don't think that's true, though, because we have previously highlighted all the ways in which he can still be a Windrunner and protect without being an active combatant.
Yes, I agree that it's not impossible for anyone.
Yeah.
It's not even impossible for a version of Kaladin.
Yeah, and like as we've talked about, the cool thing about this magic system is that there are so many different ways to be a Windrunner or Lightweaver or Edge Dancer, and like even though we have only seen one specific way to be a Windrunner, I think there are multiple ways.
And I think that you are correct for the general Windrunner. Let me rephrase. I think that this is kind of the difference between like why certain Radiants stop at different ideals. Some never get to the 5th, some never get to the 4th, some never even get to the 3rd. Like the path that we just laid out, what we just talked about, I think is Kaladin stopping at the 3rd ideal. Not because he couldn't progress.
So what do you think in the future he is just going to be back in the army and 100%. Just be fighting again?
Yep. Abso-freaking-lutely.
I would be really disappointed in that, and honestly would like completely lose interest in Kaladin, and I don't have that much interest in him right now.
I think that this is...
I think that would be a huge mistake, especially in terms of character development.
I think it's what is necessary for this character. Like, I guess maybe
path. He's just going to die in book 5. I would be fine with that.
I think that is a possibility.
He can for sure die.
Because
if it goes the way that you're saying, like
sacrifice becomes more.
Yeah, his
likely.
Character development is over.
Yes.
Like he can't grow if that is his path, and so there's
still a 5th idea.
So there's no point in having him in the book. Like, okay, if that's where he stops, then fine, dead. Like, why am I going to follow this character when he's not changing or growing at all?
I think that it definitely ups the likelihood of a sacrificial death for Kaladin if he continues down the path that I believe has now been set. But like, that's the moment that I think it is set. Either Kaladin is going to die or he is going to progress down the Windrunner ideals. And by the end of the book, that's what we get. We get the 4th ideal from Kaladin, which these are the exact words, quote, "I accept that there will be those I cannot protect." The manner in which Kaladin swears the 4th ideal is super interesting. And I think important overall for like our understanding of what it means to be those upper echelons of any Radiant Order. But someone else pointed out that Windrunners in the past are one of the two most military inclined orders, Stonewards and the Windrunners. And that in a military setting, you have what Kaladin is dealing with in the early books, which is fighting, protecting, can you kill, and still protect. But at a certain point in a person's military development, there has to be a change from Tactician to Strategist. What I mean by that is that at a certain point, you have to take the big picture in mind.
Right.
And Kaladin would never be able to become a strategist. He would always be focused on his Little Bridge 4, the relationships
his
he has,
men,
the troops on the ground. Like he's a great lieutenant or someone who's like always operating in the field. But if he ever is going to progress to a more leadership role, like to actually lead means that you are going to fail people. Like that's what every president has ever said. That's what every king has ever said. It's just like, this position sucks because no matter what I do, people lose. People are angry with me. I try to do my best, but it doesn't matter. There's always losers in every decision that I make. In a military setting, losing often means death. And Kaladin's fourth ideal is about accepting that I cannot protect everyone, that there are going to be people who die because of the decisions that I make, that there are going to be lots and lots of pain because of the decisions that I make. And I think that that is hugely significant when it's tied with what happens around the swearing of his fourth ideal. So just very quickly, the kind of ABCs of what happens is Tef dies. Kaladin watches it, goes real crazy mad very quickly.
Yeah, and that, I don't think we actually put anything in here about that particular scene, but there's some super interesting imagery that happens in that scene. Maybe we'll talk about that on a bonus episode for the Patreon or something.
He kills the pursuer in a rage, literally rips off the pursuer's head.
Very gory.
By using adhesion, which we'll segue into next. He flies to the top of the tower because one of the fused has grabbed his father and taken him up there. He doesn't have gravitation, so he's using like the little handheld device.
Yeah, his Fabrial.
Yeah. So he flies up to the tower using the device, and his father drops. Kaladin's like, I can't save him because I don't have gravitation, and I can't, manipulate this glove to go rescue someone like that. So he's like, I've lost Teft. I've, killed a fused in just absolute rage, and now I've lost my father. Everything is over. And then he jumps from the tower to commit suicide. He wants to die in that moment. And then very quickly, in like rapid succession, a bunch of stuff happens. Dalinar is flying on the storm, and Dalinar gets a message from the Stormfather like, hey, our boy is killing himself right now, like falling to his death. And Dalinar's like, you need to give him more time. So the Stormfather takes Kaladin out of time. They phrase it something like between worlds or between time or something like that. But basically, Kaladin's like experiencing time very slowly as he falls. Yeah. The Stormfather is like, Honor wouldn't do this. You need to be better. Blah, blah. Kaladin's like, I want to die. And then Dalinar comes in and he's like, I need you, boy. Like, you are real great and I love you. And Kaladin's like, I want to die. And then Dalinar uses his Bondsmith powers to show Kaladin a vision of Tien. And as always, it is Tien that brings Kaladin back.
I just want to press on this idea that it is a vision that Dalinar shows him. And I just want to introduce the idea that Dalinar may be doing some type of spiritual adhesion and giving Kaladin access to the spiritual realm, where he is a ghost, actually talking to the soul or the essence of Tien, and that this is not actually a vision.
I like that
but
better.
It's a real thing that is happening with some type of spiritual connection.
Yeah, I mean, I like that better because it would even more strongly signify the thing that Kaladin most needs to understand coming from the person that he feels he failed the most, which is Tien. And if it was not just a vision, but an actual spiritual connection, then that would be more impactful.
That's what I think. I think that it is Tien. I don't know how Dalinar would create that vision. He doesn't know the story of Kaladin and Tien to the amount of detail that is offered in the vision, particularly because it's mostly from like Tien's perspective, sort of, where Kaladin is in the vision in a place where he was not in real life and would have no memory of. And then Tien kind of can be compared to Maya in what he says, which is like, I had a choice, basically, and I was not a victim. He was a victim. He was a child who was mowed down on the field of battle. But he also chose to stand there with those other boys. He tells Kaladin to give them strength, to protect them, to show them that they weren't alone, even in death, and that there is like a power and an agency in that Kaladin doesn't need to feel sorry for.
And I think that is what solidifies the fourth ideal. Obviously, that fourth ideal also comes with the associated power boost. And now finally, Kaladin's ability to summon his Windspren honor at will, which was a long-running theory, kind of softly confirmed in Oathbringer, but now is definitely...
I feel like he didn't even summon it. He just attracted it.
Well, I think they were always there. Because Brandon has said that going forward, Kaladin's Windspren armor are literally always present.
Yeah.
And can be manifested as armor instantaneously.
Right.
But they're always around him. And so I think when we had those moments of Windspren zipping by Kaladin when he's flying through the storms, that's when he is summoning them. And then they've just been hanging out this entire time.
Yeah.
And those are his Windspren in the same way that Syl is his honor spren.
Yeah.
And so now he has a little crew, bunch of Squire Windspren, just following him around all the time. But he can send those Windspren out to form his armor around other people as well.
Which is super cool. We haven't seen that before with Shard Plate.
Yeah, first type of power move that we've seen there. Fits really well with the I will protect of just here's some armor that you can wear, basically.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder if Windrunners are the only ones that can do that because of their protecting ideal.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a ability that would be heavily used by the Windrunners because they also have all the Squires, or they have more Squires than everyone else. So it would be okay, you are going to go out and lead the Squires. I will give you my armor to aid in that leadership role. I think that would be a cool way to see things go in the future. But what I really found beautiful about Kaladin's swearing of the fourth ideal with Tien, with his father, with Dalinar and the Stormfather, and Syl all wrapped up into one, is that Lirin has been explaining or trying to teach the ideals to Kaladin for his entire life. Every time we go to a flashback with Lirin, he is teaching Kaladin.
Lirin is very wise. I know there's a lot of Lirin hate on the internet, but he's got a lot of good things to say.
And I think that it might have something to do with a possible theory we'll mention in a moment. But Lirin, goes through the basics of surgery and medicine. That's definitely life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. That's to a T. First ideal definitely lines up with the surgeon's Hippocratic Oath and all that type of stuff. But then you go further, and the second ideal is I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. Definitely, Lirin is doing that all the time. The townspeople he's protecting, the individuals that come into his clinic, we'll call it. But the third ideal, I will protect those I hate so long as it is right. His dad is helping the city lord Rashon, even though Rashon is literally starving his family.
Well, and even like all the other townspeople. Yes. Kaladin is always like, why are you so nice to them when like everyone hates you?
Exactly.
And Lyran's just like, because it's the right thing to do.
And then I will accept that there are those I cannot protect is all that Liran has been teaching him this book and in the flashbacks.
Well, yeah, like forever is always like, look, people are going to die. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. Yeah. And like, you just
think too much with your heart, not your head. Yeah. Be like, you need both. We talked about that quote previously, how like, passion needs the mind to like guide it. And you need both things. And has the fifth ideal been staring us in the face the whole time, like everything else? Maybe. Or maybe it will be shown in another flashback. But like, if Liran is talking, there's a good chance that that's going to come into play in what the ideal that Kaladin is going to say next is.
Speaking of sons and fathers, let's talk about this whole Son of Tanavast business.
Because more than once, in almost every book, there has been a reference to Son of Tanavast.
Yeah, Kaladin is called the Son of Tanavast many times throughout the books. I think at least once in each book. And Brandon has confirmed that this is something different and special versus the more common Son of Honor, which is said to kind of any human. Mm-hmm. Whereas Kaladin is really the only person that we have heard being called Son of Tanavast. Actually, until this book. In Rhythm of War, Taravangian calls Dalinar Son of Tanavast, which is the first time that anyone else has been called by that name. And I think it is just like kind of head scratching and like curious that Taravangian says this to Dalinar. And like, I'm not really clear what that means, if it means anything.
But we have this Son of Tanavast that's leading to many, many speculations and theories about what this means, what it could mean, why, and how is it different than Son of Honor. Obviously, Honor is a shard, Tanavast is the vessel.
Yeah.
If everyone generally who follows the path of honor is a son of honor or a daughter of honor, and there's only maybe a few people who are sons of Tanavast, does that mean that we're talking about literal biological offspring?
I think that is the general speculation on the internet. And then I want to sort of add a little salt on top of this Tanavast meal and just mention all of the things that Moash says in Rhythm of War about Kaladin being like unable to be killed.
Like in combat, Kaladin can't be killed.
Yeah, like he says multiple times, Kaladin can't be killed. Like, don't try.
Which is why he and Odium tried to get Kaladin to commit
kill
suicide.
Himself.
Yeah, because
so I like, maybe that's just Moash being, stupid and dramatic. Yeah. But I do just wonder if there is something to that, if Kaladin has some kind of divine protection or specialness.
There are a couple of thoughts that go along with this. For example, Dalinar notices and remarks on the fact that the Stormfather specifically asks about Kaladin after the failure at Kholinar in Oathbringer.
Oh.
And to me, that like sent off another warning bell. Stormfather also is one of the main people who calls Kaladin the son of Tanavast.
Right.
And so I am curious if there's actually, we need to do more divisions of what the Stormfather is. We've talked about this previously, but what if it's not the Stormfather Spren that is interested in Kaladin being the son of Tanavast? What if it is the power and cognitive shadow of Tanavast that is now in the Stormfather? Because remember, the Stormfather is a bunch of different things in one, and there's the Spren that's a Stormfather, probably doesn't care about like the offspring of anybody. But if Tanavast had actual biological children and Kaladin was the actual descendant of those children, then maybe the cognitive shadow remembers that and is like, I'm checking in on my one and only offspring.
Tell me about my bloodline.
Yeah. But then this, of course, begs the question of, did Tanavas, the vessel, have children on Rashar? Are there descendants of those children? Maybe Dalinar, maybe Kaladin, maybe other people that we don't know.
Yeah.
And does that give them some type of special power, special connection, special... are they more likely to be Radiants? Are they always Windrunners? Is there something like that? You know?
Yeah.
And so there's a bunch of speculation about what it means to be called the son of Tanavas. We don't have answers.
There's an extremely interesting theory, or at least I find it very intriguing, that has to do with the moon story and like the moon child myth that Hoyd tells in Oathbringer. And we're going to do an entire episode about all of the folklore in the Stormlight Archive after we're done with our Rhythm of War series. So just know that that's coming, and we'll talk about that more at that time.
So I have a theory that's kind of a mashup of all the different stuff we've been talking about. But
it's wild and crazy.
Yeah, wild and crazy kids. Buckle up, put on your thinking caps, because here we go. If we are saying that there are actual sons of Tanavas, that the vessel Tanavas had children, and that they are now in the human population, that means that Tanavas had to get it on, Zeus style, with some humans. I mean,
could Tanavas and Cultivation
have a child?
Yeah,
we know that they did.
Human children?
They had a child, the sibling.
No, I mean humans.
I know. But I think that is like the example of Cultivation and Honor having a child is the sibling. I think that this is why you got to take it Zeus style.
Got it.
And what if Tanavas came up with a plan to defeat Odium, to basically put a Hercules out into Rashar? And this could be compared to how Laris came up with a plan to defeat Ati and devised a situation for the long haul.
Sure, to like get around their accommodation.
So Tanavas has a human child in plans that hopefully one day that human child will help defeat Odium. Lirin and Kaladin and that bloodline are descendants.
Who says that has to be Lirin? Maybe
it could be
it's
Hesina.
From Hesina's side.
Hesina is tied to Aesidon too, and I'm very weird about that whole bloodline and how that's connected.
Yeah. So I mean, Hesina just seems special.
Well, Lirin, because of all the things we just talked about and how he's like basically a Windrunner but hasn't sworn the ideals, like he's literally teaching the ideals but without saying them or having a sprint. Yeah. So that's why I said Lirin, but I totally think it could be Hesina too. You have the whole thing about like Honor is not dead as long as he lives in the hearts of men. Be like, what if there are some people who carry a bit of honor, more like the blood of Tanavast, and like Lirin, they are out there teaching the ideals because it's like ingrained in their bloodline or something that they have to share. Anyways, so Kaladin, through one or both of his parents, is the descendant of that bloodline. But that comes with a caveat. If Honor went behind Cultivation's back to go diddle-daddle with some humans, that would be a violation of their romantic bonds, the promises that he made to Cultivation.
I would think of it more as like you said, comparing it to Laris and Ati. Laris, in doing what he does to get around their agreement, sort of weakens himself. That it would be more of that type of thing. Like, well, he made a child, but then that's like some of his power that's been siphoned into this human line, and therefore he is now weaker and more susceptible to Odium's attacks.
Well, I think that that's the key, is that he is weakened. I am then making another connection to what we've talked about when it comes to Odium a whole bunch of times, which is that shards don't seem to be able to break promises. Mm-hmm. And so in the Greek mythology, when Zeus cheats on Hera, Hera just keeps on like allowing that. She gets mad and sometimes takes revenge and whatnot. But in this realm, like you can't commit infidelity. You cannot break a promise if you are shards to one another. that's what odium is so afraid of. So if cultivation and honor had a romantic falling out, if there was some infidelity, even if he thought it was for a good reason, but if there was some infidelity by honor and that broke apart the bond between honor and cultivation, that there is the weakness.
Like that would be him not living in alignment with his shard's intent.
And then that starts the process.
Okay, but then I don't even
know.
I don't even know if he would be able to do that.
I don't know either.
Yeah, are they able to act outside of their shardic intents? I don't know. And like if they are, then to what extent?
And the whole aspect is what you mentioned though about creating a weakness. A weakness could have existed. This is why there's so much talk about honor like almost becoming psychotic in his trying to hold to the codes and not doing what is right or healthy, but like becoming an unhealthy version of himself. What if he violated his own moral principles or his own honor, or he violated some promise that he made to cultivation, and that began the process of honor weakening, which then odium took advantage of and eventually splintered and killed Tanavast and the Shard. That is my craziest connection that we have for today.
I'm going to save all of my cool moon theories for later. Now we're going to go to another one of the hot topics from Rhythm of War, which is adhesion. Quote, honor's truest surge.
What does that mean? Why?
WTF?
Yeah.
Why? When? How? Who? What?
The who we think is honor, but we don't even know at this point.
Yeah.
Because we have multiple beings. We have the sibling and we have Rabaniel, each who comment specifically on adhesion and it being honor's truest surge.
Right.
We have several examples of adhesion seeming to act differently to those limits that we talked about being set in the tower. We have maybe some big speculation about what are the surges, how many of them are there, and how do they all connect?
Yeah.
So let's try to go things one at a time and try to keep it pretty tight to explaining this and giving some light theories, but let's not go too crazy because there's a lot. At this point, there's a lot of speculation about what this means. And the simple answer is we don't know because this is a newly introduced mystery by Brandon.
Yes.
And so it's not even something that we can be like, well, in Words of Radiance, there's this, and then Oathbringer, we see some progression and blah, blah, blah. We have nothing. This is just like these couple of quotes and a little bit of speculation leads the internet to run a wild.
And run a wild it has. Let's start with this quote from Rabaniel. Venli asks, quote, but I thought there were 10?
That is human talk, Rabaniel said to derision. They claim a 10th, of honor alone. Adhesion is not a true surge, but a lie that was presented to us as one. True surges are of both honor and cultivation. Cultivation for life, honor to make the surge into natural law. Things must fall to the ground, so they created surges to make it happen. End quote. Now we have this quote from Rabaniel that just like sends us off on a different direction.
Yeah, totally,
new information.
Lays out that adhesion is actually not a surge, even though it is used as a surge in the Knights Radiant sort of continuum. Yeah,
I mean, everything about Vorin philosophy is 10. There's 10, big planets. There's like all of this stuff around 10.
And in this quote, she's explaining why there's only 9 types of fused. It's because they don't use adhesion because it's this lie of a surge.
So none of the fused have access to adhesion, which we believe is important and meaningful. But Brandon has said that all of the surges are a manifestation of both cultivation and honor.
Right.
And that seems to align with what Rabaniel is saying, that it's of both of them. Mm-hmm. And if it's not of both of them, then it's not a surge. Now, Brandon didn't go that far. He's not agreeing with Rabaniel.
That's Rabaniel's perspective.
Exactly. So he's just remarking on the surges generally on Rashar are of both honor and cultivation, and that there is a percentage breakdown. It's not 50-50 for each one.
Right, exactly. That is important to note, that there are certain surges that are more of cultivation and there are certain surges that are more of honor. But there is a combination of the two. Theoretically, again, as far as we know from what we've been told so far.
So when it comes to adhesion, well, let's just go very quickly down the Windrunner set list, the Windrunner power list, because they have the basic lashing, the full lashing, and the reverse lashing is how it's normally described. Of course, we know that this is two surges, often working in conjunction. The basic lashing is not working at all in the tower during the invasion, which means that it's fully of gravitation, or at least mainly of gravitation.
Sure, because we have this second quote from the sibling. Quote, "But there is one other, a man. He must be of the fourth ideal, but he has no armor, so maybe of the third, but close to the fourth? Perhaps it is something about his closeness to my father and his closeness to the surge of adhesion that keeps him conscious. His power is that of bonds." End quote. So the sibling confirms that Kaladin is able to use the surge of adhesion only in this circumstance.
And she says that he has a closeness to her father, Honor, which could be leading back to the theory about the son of Tanavast. So a basic lashing doesn't work because it's mainly of gravitation. A full lashing does work, and this is also one of the most common lashings that Kaladin and Windrunners can use. Even the Spren use this one. This is like to play jokes on people. They'll stick things to walls or whatnot, or make their shoe stick on the ground as they're walking.
See Lopen.
Yes, Lopen uses it in the most hilarious of fashions. But then there is, importantly, the reverse lashing, which is a combination of both gravitation and adhesion. It is highly intent-focused, and it deals with infusing one object and then making that object the center of gravity for other objects. Most famously, Kaladin uses this to draw in arrows to the shield that he is carrying all the way back in Way of Kings. Barely even understanding the power, and he has done virtually no exploration of his powers up until we get into Rhythm of War, which is just a whole other thing about, like, we need Zigzil in here just like training these people a little bit better, because how do you not know all of your powers?
Yeah, like organization and training.
But you could say the same about Shallan and all the different Radiants are like, first they specialize in one, then they get a little bit better with the other. So Kaladin was less great with both his reverse lashings and even his full lashings. We originally see all of these, I think, as very similar, that they're all kind of like gravity. What I think now, after Rhythm of War, is that adhesion might be this very weird thing that has more to do with the way that Dalinar's Bondsmith powers uses adhesion, which is that spiritual adhesion, or that spiritual bonding.
Yeah, maybe. I kind of think that spiritual adhesion is like a bondsmith thing, but maybe not.
The reason that I bring up that kind of spiritual connection is because of this description from the 17th Shard about reverse lashings and like what is the actual thing that is happening. Here's what they say. Quote, "A Windrunner can create a bubble around a surface that imitates its spiritual link to the ground beneath it. In effect, this makes the infused object pull other objects towards itself." End quote. That idea of manipulating something's spiritual link is what the adhesion bond seems to be doing, more than just like changing gravity. It's almost like a soul stamp from Syl, where it's changing the way that an object and other objects around it interpret and their spiritual link to one another. And so the shield that Kaladin is carrying doesn't become a source of gravity. It's literally like Kaladin creates a change in its spiritual link with the arrows that are in flight, and it says, "Arrows, you are now attracted to this shield because you think it is the ground.
Right.
And that manipulation of the spiritual link, I think, is the key misunderstood or not yet understood part of adhesion.
That's interesting. I'm interested if that is coming from the Ars Arcanum or like a Word of Brandon or something. I don't remember seeing that before, but that's really interesting.
And then we have everything that transpires in the tower itself. For example, the Windrunners as a whole are all less knocked out. They are more conscious than the other Radiants.
Yeah, they're described as kind of mumbling in their sleep and like tossing and turning more than other orders.
Which are like completely knocked out, basically comatose.
Yeah.
Compared to someone who's like sleeping and maybe like, having some stirrings going on. Now, the question of why is still up in the air. I don't think we have an answer definitively for why. But one of the theories is that adhesion is still accessible to all those Windrunners, that they are still linked in a way and protected in a way, insulated from the power manipulations.
Yeah, I think it's unclear as to why adhesion would do that. And all of this speculation is just based on that one quote from the sibling who's saying that Kaladin might be still awake because of adhesion. And we're just kind of applying that to all of the other Windrunners. My biggest question about this is Lift, because Lift is also still awake and she also has access to one of her surges, which is progression. So does that mean that progression is cultivation's truest surge? And then that seems weird because why are there two pure surges and then everyone else just gets second-rate surges, I guess?
So, and I have a working theory. Again, all of this is more speculation because it's a new thing. But I think that Lift is... Okay, what you just said about progression being cultivation's surge is correct, but it can't be fully cultivation surge.
Well,
nothing.
Yeah, I don't think we know that. That's my point.
No,
why does she have access to progression in the same way that Kaladin has access to adhesion? And if it's because adhesion is Honor's truest surge, then on the other side of that coin, progression would have to be cultivation's truest surge.
Okay, so if we're going to a percentage breakdown of where the surges fall, most of them probably close to the middle. But I think that progression is closest to cultivation's truest surge, a 90% cultivation, 10% honor.
Okay.
But cultivation can never have a surge that is only hers.
Why?
Because of what Rabaniel says. This is not to say Rabaniel is correct.
Yeah, I was going to say. That doesn't mean anything.
Yes, I think it does. Because of the two-step process. Cultivation gives life to the surges. Honor makes them natural law. Cultivation can't...
What? So, cultivation created something and Honor was just no, I'm not making your surge into law?
No. He did. He made progression. It's mostly cultivation surge. It's mostly of cultivation.
Okay, but then that begs the question, how would Honor be able to create a surge by himself if he needs cultivation to give it life?
Because I think that adhesion, the power of bonds, is Honor's power. It is the thing that he is doing all the time. When he creates a surge, he's using adhesion, spiritual adhesion, bond, that is his mechanism.
Yeah, and Honor is described as being the power of oaths and bonds.
Exactly. And so cultivation can do similar stuff. Maybe even that was the primary way that the singers interacted with the world. And it wasn't until the humans came over that they realized that another way could be done. And Honor stepped in and was wait, I have this adhesion thing.
Right. And you can make bonds.
Exactly. And so I think that basically if we take Rabaniel's as statement as somewhat true, as getting at a truth that is pointing in the direction of something real. The 9 surges were created by cultivation and honor, progression being the most of cultivation, but the mechanism in which they did that was by honor's power, which is adhesion. So it is not quite a surge, because it's not similar to the other ones, because it's just honor's surge. It's just a thing he can do. And therefore, I think that Lift is able to use progression because progression is the one surge that can operate fully off of life light. And
that doesn't make any sense, though, because Lift does everything with life light.
She
also
uses
get
both of her surges with life light.
We also get that confirmation in this book that she's using life light, not stormlight.
All the time.
Yeah. So why is she able to use progression only and not her other surge?
The only explanation that I have is that progression is the most of cultivation.
I know. I just think that's a weak argument.
I don't disagree. Like, I don't have a better, if I had a better argument, I'd make a better argument. But like, what I think is most true and this concept of honor's truest surge.
And I still think that's weird. It's just a weird way that then this system that is pretty balanced suddenly becomes
way
super unbalanced.
Yeah.
Like, why do windrunners get to be extra special with their adhesion surge? And like, it just seems weird to me. I know that there
because of the imbalance.
Is all this stuff being said, but it just like doesn't fit in a way that doesn't feel right to me.
So my only explanation is that your desire for wanting things to fit and feel right is the same desire that the Rosharians have, and the same desire that like all humans have, is that we want the story to make sense, but the story doesn't need to make sense.
Nope. I'm actually going to counter that
and
quote the Ars Arcanum and my patron Saint Chris. She points out in the Ars Arcanum, quote, on Roshar, there are considered to be 10 elements, not the traditional 4 or 16, depending upon local tradition, end quote. I think this is an extremely important point. The Cosmere is built on base 16 or base 4, really. Mm-hmm. You know, there are 16.
The 4 Dawn Shards preceded Adonalsian.
There are 4 Dawn Shards. There are 16 shards. There are 16 metals on...
the base 4 is good.
Like, clearly that's an important number to the Cosmere. That is what everything is built on. So then it doesn't make any sense at all that Roshar would only have 10. And then I think we can go back to Mistborn and cite their original working formulation of accessible metals and powers. They thought that they had it all figured out and were 10. Like, well, these two don't really make sense, but it's fine. There's just 10. That's just the way it is. And they were wrong. And so I think that there are 6 more surges on Roshar that like we just don't know about or haven't been identified. And then maybe that added complexity will sort of make adhesion make more sense in the bigger picture.
Okay, that I totally agree with, because I was thinking that we were getting hyper focused on like there has to be 10 because 10 is a nice round number, and I'm like, no, that's the same mistake.
No. I'm saying it doesn't make sense. And I think it doesn't make sense. Yeah, perfect. Like, it does need to make sense, and it doesn't currently, which either means that like it's something about we're all wrong about adhesion, and like it can't be just sticking out like a sore thumb like that, or that the whole system is broken and actually there's a lot more. And then it would make sense that there is adhesion and progression, because maybe there are also like other god powers or something, and then it's not just like 2 random ones and then everyone else gets shafted.
No, I think that this is exactly what is supposed to happen, is that we are supposed to see the separation of adhesion from the other surges. This 9-in-1 division very much mimics what happened on Mistborn about this division between like 8 regular metals and 2 god metals, and that makes 10, and 10's a nice number.
Yeah, and then like
10's
ATM,
never
right?
a nice-
ATM being like the big special metal that's like way more powerful than everything else, and they're just like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then the lost metal myths and like all this, the 11th metal is... So I think that really what this is about is introducing this concept to get us away from thinking about the base 10 and back into a base 4, which could maybe then, as you said, lead to 16. But there is a whole bunch of speculation. If you have any comments, questions, theories of your own, reach out on YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, Patreon.
I feel like this is another episode that's going to generate a lot of conversation, which again is awesome. Comment, send us messages, tell us what you think.
As you heard, we have many episodes planned. Some of them are going to be looking at like the folklore of all of the different mythos that we learn throughout the Stormlight Archive, but we are continuing down the path of what happened in Rhythm of War for our next few episodes, so stick with us there. Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.